हेलो दोस्तों, बिगिनर्स पॉइंट में आपका स्वागत है। और अभी हम कर रहे हैं इकोनॉमी। ठीक है। ये कौन सी 11th क्लास का सेकंड चैप्टर है। इससे पहले के अगर नहीं करे हैं चैप्टर्स तो प्लेलिस्ट बना रखी है, उसमें जाकर आप देख सकते हैं। उसमें 9th से लेकर के 10th तक कंप्लीट हो गए, 11 चल रहा है, 12 तक कंप्लीट करेंगे, 9th टू 12th। और उसके बाद पॉलिटी, फिर हिस्ट्री, ऐसे सारे सब्जेक्ट करेंगे। इंडियन इकोनॉमी 1950 टू 1990। आफ्टर स्टडिंग दिस चैप्टर द लर्नर्स विल, ये फालतू की बात, कुछ काम की नहीं है। मतलब वो ये फाइव प्लान वगैरह सीखेंगे, 1950 से 1990 तक क्या हुआ ये सब सीखेंगे। ठीक है। फर्स्ट 5 year plan, the central objective of planning in India is to initiate a process of development which will raise the living standards and open out to the people new opportunities for a richer and more varied life. Introduction: on 15 August 1947, India woke to a new dawn of freedom. 15 अगस्त 1947 को जैसे ही उठे, एक नया दिन था। इसका आज़ादी का न्यू एरा, आज़ादी की नई सुबह थी। फाइनली फाइनली वी वेयर मास्टर्स ऑफ आवर own destiny after some 200 years of British rule. The job of nation building was now in our own hands. The leaders of independent India had to decide, among other things, the type of economic system most suitable for our nation, a system which would promote the welfare of all rather than a few. There are different types of economic systems, and among them, socialism appealed to Jawaharlal Nehru the most. However, he was not in favor of the kind of socialism established in the former Soviet Union, where all the means of production, that is, all the factories and farms in the country, were owned by the government. देयर वेर नो प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी। जब आज़ादी वगैरह हो गई थी, जितनी भी प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी थी अंग्रेज़ों की थी, जो छोड़कर चले गए थे बाहर, तो वो सब किसने कर ली? गवर्नमेंट के पास चली गई। इट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल इन अ डेमोक्रेसी like India for the government to change the ownership pattern of land and other properties of its citizens in the way that it was done in the former Soviet Union. Nehru and many other leaders and thinkers of the newly independent India sought an alternative to the extreme version of capitalism and socialism. Basically, sympathizing with the socialist outlook, they found the answer in an economic system which, in their view, combined the best features of socialism without its drawbacks. In this view, India would be a socialist society with a strong public sector, but also with private property and democracy. The government would plan for the एक ये बॉक्स है क्या है? Types of economic systems. Every society has to answer three questions. What goods and services should be produced in the country? How should the goods and services be produced? Should producers use more human labor or more capital machines for producing things? How should the goods and services be distributed among people? One answer to these questions is to depend on the market forces of supply and demand. In a market economy, also called capitalism, only those consumer goods will be produced that are in demand, that is, goods that can be sold profitably either in the domestic or in the foreign markets. If cars in demand, cars will be produced, and if bicycles are in demand, bicycles will be produced. If labor is cheaper than capital, more labor intensive methods of production will be used, and vice versa. In a capitalist society, the goods produced are distributed among people not on the basis of what people need but on the basis of purchasing power, the ability to buy goods and services. That is, one has to have the money in the pocket to buy it. Low cost housing for the poor is much needed but will not count as demand in the market sense because the poor do not have purchasing power to back the demand. As a result, this commodity will not be produced and supplied as per market forces. Such as society did not appeal to Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, for it mean that the great majority of people of the country would be left behind without the chance to improve their quality of life. A socialist society answers the three questions in a totally different manner. In a socialist society, the government decides what goods are to be produced in accordance with the needs of society. It is assumed that the government knows what is good for the people of the country, and so the desire of individual consumers are not given much importance. The government decides how goods are to be produced and how they should be distributed. In principle, distribution under socialism is supposed to be based on what people need and not on what they can afford to purchase. Unlike under capitalism, for example, a socialist nation provides free health care to all its citizens. Strictly, a socialist society has no private property since everything is owned by the state. In Cuba and China, for example, most of the economic activities are governed by the socialist principles. Most economies are mixed economies, that is, the government and the market together answer the three questions of what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute what is produced. In a mixed economy, the market will provide whatever goods and services it can produce well, and the government will provide essential goods and services which the market fails to do. What is plan? Plan क्या है? A plan spell out how the resources of a nation should be put to use. It should have some general goals as well as specific objectives which are to be achieved within a specified period of time. In India, plans were of 5 years distribution duration and were called 5-year plans. We borrowed this from the former Soviet Union, the pioneer in national planning. Our plan documents up to the year 2017 not only specify the objectives to be attained in the 5 years plan, 5 years of a plan, but also what is to be achieved over a period of 20 years. This long term plan is called perspective plan. The 5-year plans were supposed to provide the basis for the perspective plan. It will be unrealistic to accept all the goals of a plan to be given equal importance in all the plans. In fact, the goals may actually be in conflict. For example, the goal of introducing modern technology may be in conflict with the goal of increasing employment if the technology reduces the need for labor. The planners have to balance the goals, a very difficult job indeed. We find different goals being emphasized in different plans in India. India's 5-year plans did not spell out how much of each and every good and service is to be produced. This is neither possible nor necessary. The former Soviet Union tried to do this or failed. It is enough if the plan is specific about the sectors where it plays a commanding role. For instance, power generation and irrigation, while leaving the rest to the market. Economy with the private sector being encouraged to be part of the plan effort. The Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948, Industrial Policy Resolution 1948, and the directive principles of the Indian Constitution reflected this outlook. In 1950, the Planning Commission was set up with the Prime Minister as its chairperson. The era of 5-year plans had begun. The goals of 5-year plans. A plan should have some clearly specific goals. The goals of the 5-year plans were growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. This does not mean that all the plans have given equal importance to all these goals. Due to limited resources, a choice has to be made in each plan about which of the goals is to be given primary importance. Nevertheless, the planners have to ensure that as far as possible the policies of the plans do not contradict these four goals. Let us now learn about the goals of planning in some detail. Growth. It refers to increase in the country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services within the country. It implies either a larger stock of productive capital or a larger size of supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase in the efficiency of productive capital and services. A good indicator of economic growth in the language of economics is steady increase in the gross domestic product GDP. इससे पहले ही बॉक्सों में क्या लिखा है? Mahalanobis, the architect of Indian planning. Many distinguished thinkers contributed to the formulation of India's five-year plans. 5 ईयर प्लान से रिलेटेड महालनोबिस, इन्होंने कौन है ये? इन्होंने प्लान बनाया था ये. अमंग देम द नेम ऑफ द सेटिस्फिएशन प्रशांता चंद्रा महालनोबिस स्टैंड्स आउट. Planning in the real sense of the term begin with the second five-year plan. The second plan, a landmark contribution to development planning in general, laid down the basic idea regarding goals of Indian planning. This plan was based on the ideas of Mahalanobis. In that sense, he can be regarded as the architect of Indian planning. Mahalanobis was born in 1893 in Calcutta. He was educated at the Presidency College in Calcutta and at Cambridge University in England. His contributions to the subject of statistics brought him international fame. In 1945, he was made a fellow member of Britannian Royal Society, one of the most prestigious organizations of scientists. Only the most outstanding scientists are made members of this society. Mahalanobis established the Indian Statistical Institute (ISI) in Calcutta and started a journal, Sankhya, which still serves as a respected forum for statisticians to discuss their ideas. Both the ISI and Sankhya are highly regarded by statisticians and economists all over the world to this day. During the second plan period, Mahalanobis invited many distinguished economists from India and abroad to advise him on India's economic development. Some of these economists became Nobel Prize winners later, which shows that he could identify individuals with talent. Among the economists invited by Mahalanobis were those who were very critical of the socialist principles of the second plan. In other words, he was willing to listen to what his critics had to say, the mark of a great scholar. Many economists today reject the approach to planning formulated by Mahalanobis, but he will always be remembered for playing a vital role in putting India in the road to economic progress, and statisticians continue to profit from his contribution to statistical theory. The service sector, as a country develops, it undergoes structural change. In the case of India, the structural change is peculiar. Usually, with development, the share of agriculture declines and the share of industry becomes dominant. At higher levels of development, the service sector contributes more to the GDP than the other two sectors. In India, the share of agriculture in the GDP was more than 50%, as we would except for a poor country. But by 1990, the share of the service sector was 40.59%, more than that of agriculture or industry, like what we find in developed nations. This phenomenon of growing share of the service sector was accelerated in the post 1991 period. This marked the onset of globalization in the country, which will be discussed in chapter 3. The GDP is the market value of all the final goods and services produced in the country during a year. You have studied this concept in class 10th as well. You can think of the GDP as a cake, and growth is increase in the size of the cake. If the cake is larger, more people can enjoy it. It is necessary to produce more goods and services if the people of India are to enjoy, in the words of first five-year plan, a more rich and varied life. The GDP of a country is derived from the different sectors of the economy. namely the agricultural sector, the industrial sector, and the service sector. The contribution made by each of these sectors makes up the structural composition of the economy. In some countries, growth in agriculture contributes more to the GDP growth, while in some countries, the growth in the service sector contributes more to GDP growth. Modernization to increase the production of goods and services. The producers have to adopt new technology. For example, a farmer can increase the output on the farm by using new seed varieties instead of using the old ones. Similarly, a factory can increase output by using a new type of machine. Adaptation of new technology is called modernization. However, modernization does not refer only to the use of new technology, but also to change in social outlook such as the recognition that women should have the same rights as men. In a traditional society, women are supposed to remain at home while men work. A modern society makes use of the talents of women in the workplace, in banks, factories, schools, etc. And such a society in most occasions is also prosperous. Self-reliance, a nation can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources or by using resources imported from other nations. The first seven five-year plans gave importance to self-reliance, which means avoiding imports of those goods which could be produced in India itself. This policy was considered a necessity in order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food. It is understandable that people who were recently freed from foreign domination should give importance to self-reliance. Further, it was feared that dependence on the imported food supplies, foreign technology, and foreign capital may make India's sovereignty vulnerable to foreign interference in our policies. Equity, now growth, modernization, and self-reliance by themselves may not improve the kind of life which people are living. A country can have high growth, the most modern technology developed in the country itself, and also have most of its people living in the poverty. It is important to ensure that the benefits of economic prosperity reach the poor sections as well instead of being enjoyed only by the rich. So, in addition to growth, modernization, and self reliance, equity is also important. Every Indian should be able to meet his or her basic needs such as food, a decent house, education, and health care, and inequality in the distribution of wealth should be reduced. Let us now see how the first seven five-year plans covering the period 1950-1990 attempted to attain these four goals and the extent to which they succeeded in doing so. With reference to agriculture, industry, and trade, you will study the policies and developmental issues taken up after 1991 in chapter 3. फिर आ जाते हैं एग्रीकल्चर. You have learned in chapter 1 that during the colonial rule there was neither growth nor equity in the agricultural sector. The policymakers of independent India had to address these issues, which they did through land reforms and promoting the use of high yielding variety HYV seeds, which ushered in a revolution in Indian agriculture. Land reforms. At the time of independence, the land tenure system was characterized by intermediaries. They're usually called zamindars, jagirdars, etc., who merely collected rent from the actual tillers of the soil without contributing towards improvements of the on the farm. The low productivity of the agricultural sector forced India to import food from the United States of America USA. Equity in agriculture called for land reforms, which primarily refer to change in the ownership of land holding. Just a year after independence, steps were taken to abolish intermediaries and to make the tillers the owners of land. The idea behind this move was that ownership of land would give incentives to the tillers to invest in making improvements provided sufficient capital was made available to them. Land ceiling was another policy to promote equity in the agricultural sector. This means fixing the maximum size of land which could be owned by an individual. The purpose of land ceiling was to reduce the concentration of land ownership in a few hands. The abolition of intermediaries meant that some 200 lakh tenants came into direct contact with the government. They were thus freed from being exploited by the zamindars. The ownership converted on tenants gave them the incentive to increase output, and this contributed to growth in agriculture. However, the goal of equity was not fully served by abolition of intermediaries. In some areas, the former zamindars continued continued to own large areas of land by making use of some loopholes in the legislation. There were cases where tenants were evicted and the landowners claimed to be self-cultivators, the actual tillers claiming ownership of the land, and even when the tillers got ownership of land, the poorest of the agricultural laborers such as sharecroppers and landless laborers did not benefit from land reforms. The land ceiling legislation also faced hurdles. The big landlords challenged the legislation in the courts, delaying its implementation. They used this delay to register their lands in the name of close relatives, thereby escaping from the legislation. The legislation also had a lot of loopholes which were exploited by the big landholders to retain their lands. Land reform were successful in Kerala and West Bengal because these states had governments committed to the policy of land to the tiller. Unfortunately, other states did not have the same level of commitment, and vast inequality in landholding continues to this day. The Green Revolution, इससे पहले एक पेज था ये, ownership and incentives. Ownership and incentives. The policy of land to the tiller is based on the idea that the cultivators will take more interest. They will have more incentive in increasing output if they are the owners of the land. This is because ownership of land enables the tiller to make profit from the increased output. Tetanus, tetanus, किराएदार जो होते हैं do not have the incentive to make improvements on land since it is the landowner who would benefit more from higher output. The importance of ownership is in providing incentives is well illustrated by the cardlessness with which farmers in the former Soviet Union used to pack fruits for sale. It was not uncommon to see farmers packing rotten fruits along with fresh fruits in the same box. Now, every farmer knows that the rotten fruits will spoil the fresh fruits if they are packed together. This will be a loss to the farmer since the fruits cannot be sold. So, why did the Soviet farmers do something which would so obviously result in loss for them? The answer lies in the incentives facing the farmers. Since farmers in the former Soviet Union did not own any land, they neither enjoyed the profits nor suffered the losses. In the absence of ownership, there was no incentive on the part of farmers to be efficient, which also explains the poor performance of the agricultural sector in the Soviet Union despite availability of vast areas of highly fertile land. द ग्रीन रिवॉल्यूशन करेंगे आगे अगले चैप्टर में, अगली क्लास